On today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, we have some news on Ilya Samsonov's arbitration date, which has been set. We have a trade within the Atlantic Division. And of course, our mailbag. We are going to get that started. We're going to be answering your questions all week right here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, your daily fix for all things Leafs. I'm your host, David Morassutti from Sportsnet. Mike DiStefano, he is, fortunately for him, he's starting up his cruise over in Italy while I have to go and suffer on his, seeing all his stuff on Instagram. I might have to mute the guy at this point. So I will be flying solo for the next few weeks. I will be working to get in some people to come and, help me out while Mike is away, although other people are on vacation. So we're going to make this work as best as possible. But don't worry, we're going to be continuing with the normal 5 days a week for this week. But then we will be going to 3 days a week here on the Locked On Leafs podcast. But we'll be bringing your Leafs information, whatever information we can find. Make sure you can go and get your podcast wherever you get your podcast from. And make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube if you haven't already. Locked On Leafs right over there because it's your team every day. And I want to thank everybody who has been subscribing. If you're an everydayer, we definitely do appreciate that, especially during the dog days of summer where there ain't much news. But when there is news, we do have to make sure we give you all the details. So obviously the big one being Ilya Samsonov finally has his arbitration dates, laid out. The NHLPA releases all that information, and he is scheduled for the second day of arbitration on July 21st. The arbitration hearings start July 20th. He will be on July 21st. So basically what that means is the Leafs have up until then to try and get, arbitration, try to avoid arbitration and get that contract signed before that. They could. Now they can go to arbitration, do the hearing, and still work out a deal within that period. But let's be honest here, the Leafs don't want to go to arbitration. Ilya Samsonov probably doesn't want to go to arbitration either. It's just another tool to kind of, let's get the process going a little bit quicker here. So I would say between now and July 21st, there's a good chance that we likely don't see Ilya Samsonov go to arbitration. So that's something we'll be keeping our eyes on there. From all cases here, when you're looking at an arbitration case, it doesn't seem like the Leafs are going to be pushing to get a long-term deal here with Samsonov. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me. Samsonov wouldn't be pushing for a long-term deal because if he plays well again going into the season, he has a chance to recoup even more money, right? Because he doesn't really have the same leverage, even though he has arbitration, right? And even though the hearing, it might go in his favor where they offer him a pretty decent deal. If he takes if he goes into arbitration now, all right, and decides, I'm just going to do the 1 or 2 year, then he might be able to bounce and roll that into a bigger deal the next time around. This is someone who's 26 years old. So for goaltenders, some goaltenders don't really get paid in some cases. In his case, because he really hasn't established himself as an everyday starting goaltender, bounced around between, doing that in Washington, came to Toronto. He was the starting goaltender, but him and Matt Murray were kind of splitting the duties. Then it became his net, right? He has a chance right now to establish himself as a starter and earn that starting goaltender money, right? I'm talking in like the, $5 million range potentially. But goaltending is so fickle here in the NHL because you're looking at the goalies who are getting paid. Like I'm talking like the elite guys in the $7-8 million range. Those are guys who are playing like they are no doubt the starting goaltender. They're going to be playing close to that 60 game mark for the team that they're playing for. Like, Ilya Sorokin, we just saw his deal in New York. So like this is where Samsonov has a little bit of a disadvantage because he really hasn't established himself in that way yet. So, he is deserving of a bump from his 1.8. He is not a goaltender that played at a $1.8 million value. He played higher than that when you consider how many games he played and the fact that he had, it wasn't an amazing season, right? It was still a .919 save percentage, 2.33 goals against average. That is a good season. Good season statistically, but it's not like he was up for the Vezina, like an all-mark, in that regard, right? So this is where when Mike and I were talking about what a contract would like for him, I think you got to be weary of how much term you want to give and how much salary you want to give. So that's something I'm sure the Leafs have been debating and want to figure that out. So I just assume, though, that a deal will get done beforehand. This is just, formality of the process to kind of help push it along for sure. Now, there was some other news that happened during Leafs development camp. Unfortunately, it wasn't great news. I don't know if anybody watched the scrimmage from development camp, but Ronnie Herevanin, he was on the receiving end of a very, very the way I'm going to explain this hit was it was a tough hit because, look, if you haven't watched it yet, just fair warning, it is a very big hit. Big hit. Like you see Herevanin is down. He wasn't moving. Barely moving, right? And so it was a very tough hit. He got hit by a guy who wasn't even, he was just brought up as a undrafted free agent guy, right? So Nolan Dillingham, trying to earn himself a spot. It's not something you want to see in a scrimmage game. Although it's tough in some cases to tell players to dial down that intensity. I do get that. So, like, for me, the hit was, it wasn't a dirty hit. Haley Wickenheiser did, the assistant GM, did say it wasn't a dirty hit, but it's also, and it's an unexpected hit in a scrimmage. So Herevanin does have a concussion. He was seen walking around the facility, so maybe, it's not as bad as maybe it looked. It looked pretty bad in my opinion. So, I think what, like it happens. It's something. It's a play that happens. You don't want to see those happen. They just got to hope Herevanin is okay and they can move forward. So there's a couple of little things there to get you guys caught up on anything we missed over the weekend. I was away for the weekend, so I was getting myself caught up when I got back. That's why the podcast is coming out a little later too. I also want to give a chance for the mailbag to kind of get some interest going in the mailbag here. So I'm going to go through the mailbag a little later in the show because after the break, I do want to talk about a trade that happened within the division, the Atlantic Division. We know now Alex DeBrincat, no longer a member of the Ottawa Senators. He is off to Detroit. We're going to look at what this means for the Leafs, and some people are trying to make some connections between DeBrincat and Nylander, and that's always what happens when a deal like this happens because we know what's kind of come about there with that situation. So I'm going to dissect all that, and then we'll get started with the mailbag on the other side. But before we do that, let me tell you about today's show sponsor, and that is our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend on everything from the money line to over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run in a game. You can even bet on get yourself some hockey futures going in there. You can go and do that over at FanDuel. All that on the app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB, NHL, whatever sport you want to bet on than over at FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook. Sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get that $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball and the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, everybody, we are back here on the Locked On Leafs podcast. It is your team every day, and we had a trade go down in the NHL. We now know that Alex DeBrincat is no longer a member of the Ottawa Senators. It felt like that was going to be an inevitability, considering they could not get that guy signed to a contract. He did not want to sign a contract, so he is now off to the Detroit Red Wings. And many were wondering what type of return could the Senators get when they, make that trade for DeBrincat, because I don't know if you remember, the Ottawa Senators made quite an investment in that, in Alex DeBrincat when they brought him in from the Chicago Blackhawks. I'm going to read you, before I talk about the return that Ottawa got from Detroit, let me tell you about the deal that Ottawa made to get DeBrincat in the first place. Ottawa sent the 7th overall pick in the 2022 draft. Chicago also got the 39th pick in the draft, so a second round pick, and a third round selection in the 2024 draft. All that for Alex DeBrincat. At the time, Alex DeBrincat had one more year left on his deal as an RFA, meaning the Senators, weren't in a pressure to get a deal done because they felt like we have time. He's an RFA. We own his rights. We didn't feel like there was an issue trying to get a deal done there. But as time went on, it was getting more and more likely that a deal was not going to happen. DeBrincat it didn't feel like the Senators were the team he wanted to stay with, which is unfortunate for Ottawa because, they paid up quite a bit. But this is the issue when you trade for a guy like this and you don't get that contract signed. Look at what Detroit just did. They weren't making that deal for Alex DeBrincat. They weren't going to give anything up until they got that contract signed. So what did Ottawa get back? So essentially, Ottawa got back Dominic Kubalik, a defensive prospect in Donovan Zabrango, a conditional 2024 first-round draft pick, in Detroit's 2024 fourth-round selection for DeBrincat. So just remember, I said the Senators paid the 7th overall pick, a second rounder, and a third rounder in 2024. And that ended up, in the end, being Kubalik, Zabrango, a conditional first, and Detroit's 2024 fourth-round selection. And the funny thing here is that there's some conditions with this first-round pick, being that they could either send their own 2024 first-round pick or Boston's first-round pick. And if the Bruins pick is a top 10 pick, Boston will have the chance to keep that pick, take their 2025 pick, give it to Detroit, and then the Red Wings will decide, do we want to send Boston's 2025 pick or our own 2024 pick? So the Senators are basically in the whichever pick you want to give us, we're going to have to take it. Like, that is a tough situation there for Ottawa. Not really. It just seems like they're not going to get a great pick out of all this, considering what they paid for DeBrincat. And so many are wondering, what does this mean for the Leafs? And they're trying to make this comparison with, you've got Nylander's stats and DeBrincat's stats are quite similar. They're kind of both offensive guys. But here's the thing with William Nylander. He is a UFA. DeBrincat was an RFA. DeBrincat didn't really have the opportunity to go and tell Ottawa, I'm going to go test the market. You better just trade me now than when it comes to a deal. So Nylander holds a little more of the, cards in his hand in this situation, because if the Leafs decide they want to trade him, a team that's going to want to acquire Nylander wants that deal guaranteed. And the Leafs are not going to do a deal with William Nylander without knowing that the team trading for him is going to get a deal done. So it gets very, very tough here, and this is why a Nylander deal is tougher than a DeBrincat deal, in my opinion, because we already know the struggles that the Leafs are having right now trying to get this contract situation sorted out. Being Nylander apparently is looking for $10 million, and the Leafs don't want to pay him $10 million. Well, DeBrincat just signed for $7.875 million. Okay. These last few deals that have been signed haven't been favoring William Nylander's desire to get $10 million. Sorry to say this to all the people who are hoping that Nylander gets paid. The trend is not going in his favor, unfortunately. We did the tier ranking, and I understand some people are saying, well, when you look at the comparison between Marner and Nylander, is it really that much of a difference? The perception of Nylander, I guarantee around the league, isn't putting him in a class of the guys getting paid $10+ million, in my opinion. I understand the cap is going up. DeBrincat got 7.875. Detroit had the leverage there, so they could, and they could make him sign that deal. And it was only a 4-year deal. Let's not forget that. Nylander, if he's looking for that money, he's likely going to have to sign, 7-8 years. He's not going to get $10 million or whatever he wants on a short-term deal. Maybe that's why he's looking for the $10 million. But, we look at certain deals that were made recently. I point to, and Mike and I pointed the Timo Meier deal at 8.8 for 8 years. I understand that Timo Meier was an RFA and all those things, but I still don't think Nylander, when you're comparing the player, can really say that he's worth a lot more than Timo Meier. So this is a tricky situation the Leafs find themselves in, a lot trickier than the DeBrincat one, because Nylander can just walk. He can just tell the Leafs, I'm gonna walk at the end of free agency. If I'm the Leafs, you're telling them, give us your no trade list, and we're gonna trade you to a team and cut our losses. But I don't think it's gonna get to that point. This is why I think the Leafs prefer to get a deal done with Nylander, because I think they realize that is a very tough trade to make and to come out on top. But at the same time, I'm of the belief that if Nylander can't lower his demands, it might not matter what deal. Like, the Leafs just at some point have to say, we can't afford this. And that's going to have to be the conversation that they have with Nylander's agent. So that's going to be it's a tough situation. So the Senators deal, what that shows me is, man, you cannot do that deal until you get an idea of what, like, you're doing that deal knowing the team is going to sign Nylander to a deal that they can come to an agreement with, and you're trying to maximize your value. I think Nylander is a better player than DeBrincat. I do. I think he's a more consistent offensive player. I think he's not the best defensive player, but I do think there's things he does that DeBrincat doesn't do. So, yeah, he's going to be worth $8+ million. To anybody that thinks he's in the $7 million range, I don't think that's the case. We've seen players similar to Nylander get into that $8 million range. So the Leafs are going to have to figure this one out. They have time. Here's the thing. They do have time if teams are still willing to make a deal that works for both sides. If they can find a trade partner. Do I know who that trade partner is? I'm not too sure yet. Maybe that's something if you want to ask in the mailbag. We're going to get to the mailbag next on the other side here. I'm going to remind people that if you haven't submitted your mailbag questions, you still can. I'm going to be doing them for the next little bit because we're a little tight for news. We don't have a lot of news to discuss. I'm going to try to get some guests to talk about the Leafs offseason, but the mailbag will help, answer your questions and get a good discussion going on here. Maybe I'll bring also someone on here and we can discuss some of the mailbag questions here on the other side. But this is the Locked On Leafs podcast. We're going to come back. We're going to go through the mailbag on the other side. Thank you guys all for sticking around for as long as you can. And we're going to do that on the other side here on the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's your team every day. Welcome back to the Locked On Leafs podcast. David Morassutti here. Mike DeStefano is on vacation the next few weeks, so I am going solo for today. Might go solo for a few shows, but I will definitely have some guests on. I like to do this with a guest. It's harder to do the solo part on your own. So Thank you for everybody who has been listening. Thanks for those who are going to continue to listen, and anybody who does subscribe or continue to subscribe. I really do appreciate it. We're going to be filling you with Leafs content because it is tough to have some Leafs content during the summertime. Not many places are covering Leafs every day during the summer. We are going to be doing 5 days a week. We will eventually move down to 3 days a week because, frankly, 5 days a week all summer long, unsustainable. But we are still going to be bringing you great content throughout the summertime. So have no fear. We're going to do that. And one of my favorite things to do to help, give that opportunity is to do a mailbag. So I asked on Sunday, I sent out that video. I got some replies. If you didn't submit a question, you can do that in the comments for this video or on the mailbag video. I've already taken the ones from the comments of the last video. So if you add some new ones, I'll know who it is. Or you can just do it at this video just to make my life a little easier. I do appreciate that. So I'm not going to get to all the questions right away because I do want to save some for. There's some that can be done over the next few days. So I want to spread things out a little bit just to make it a little easier. And I can give you guys a little more in-depth answers rather than a yes or no. I want to give you guys, an honest answer here for myself. All right. I call this the icebreaker question because it has nothing to do with hockey. It's got nothing to do with the Leafs. I did say you can ask me anything. So I blame Mike for this one because this seems to be a theme for the show. I apologize for anybody that hates the hair questions, but here comes one. Ron Murray 7349. Cure for a bad haircut. Cure for a bad haircut? 1. Change your barber. I have never had a bad haircut for my barber, and that's because I trust the guy. You don't trust your guy? Cut him loose. 2. You can go do what I do. Get rid of as much of it as possible. Cure for a bad haircut? Don't have bad hair to cut. Simple as that. Another one. You tell your barber, just as Mike just did, he had a bad haircut. He didn't like it. Tell him, you got to fix it, man. This is my reputation, your reputation on the line here. So, Ron, that is what I would do for a bad haircut. Those are my suggestions. If you have any more suggestions, feel free to add them into the comments. So, thank you for that one. Here's another fun one. That one I never really ever get asked about, and one that never really thought about until I saw the question. So this is from Core Personal Fitness. Are you a fan of any other NHL team? Good question. I am not a fan of any other team. It's been Leafs ever since I was 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old. Been a Leafs fan ever since. Some of you have probably seen the Cujo jersey, my first hockey jersey I ever got back in 2000 when I was 6 years old. I have been a Leafs fan my entire life. The only time I had ever cheered for something other than the Leafs was when the Mighty Ducks movie came on. I just loved those movies. Like the Mighty Ducks were my childhood when it came to like movies, VHS all the time. I got a Mighty Ducks jersey. I can't remember where I got it from. And I really liked Paul Correa too. I used to watch, the highlights of Paul Correa, any of those hockey videos where they show highlights, the Don Cherry Rock'em Sock'em, where you see that Paul Correa slap shot, amazing moves that Paul Correa would make on the ice. And I was such a huge Paul Correa fan, and I had a Ducks jersey just like Paul Correa. I've never got his name on the back, and just realizing that now, but I probably would put his name on the back. But I never cheered for the Ducks. Let me make that clear. I never cheered for the Ducks fan. I just cheered for Paul Correa. So it's only been the Leafs. If you ever know me, I'm someone that doesn't cheer for multiple teams. I will cheer for a storyline. I want to see a nice storyline as the journalist in me. But even then, my Leafs fandom, obviously, I do collect stuff. You cheer for the storylines and all those things. So it's I never waver, even though, God, this team tests me quite a bit. I've never ever thought about not cheering for this team either. So if that helps, that's kind of where my fandom has always been, and it's never changed, and it never will change. Probably never will change. Hopefully not. Hopefully, don't give me a reason to change it. All right, let's move on to There's some really good questions, but you know what? I'm going to go with one here. Since we were talking about Samsonov and the arbitration, all those things, let me get the Samsonov question that was asked from forgiveness or love. What would happen if Samsonov struggles out of the gate this season? That's actually a really good question because we're under the impression that Matt Murray is going to be traded. I don't see how Matt Murray stays on the team considering the salary cap and those things there, unless the Leafs make another deal to save some money. Which, if you're trying to trade someone else to make Matt Murray fit, I don't think that would be a wise decision because Matt Murray has proven to be you can't trust Matt Murray to play for you as your starting goaltender, as a goaltender in period, right? So I would think that the Leafs are committed to a Samsonov Wall, tandem. I know that Treliving tried to make it seem like, we don't want to throw the young guy in there to think that he's going to not be the savior, but that he can produce like the way he did last year. But we've seen Joseph Woll get better and better each year. Last year was like, yes, it was a really good season, something to build off of. But you're not asking Joseph Woll to come in here and play 40 games for you. Now, if Samsonov struggles out of the gate, that's a tough one. That's like that. The Leafs would be in a tough situation if that happens. You'd have to see what Joseph Woll can do. I don't see a situation where the Leafs try to trade for someone unless the Leafs decide, you know what, Samsonov, there's a better option out there and we go for it. I don't think that's where the Leafs will go. They're going to have to find a way to make sure that a Samsonov Woll pairing works. And I have faith in it. I think Woll, if they have to give him more starts, I think he's capable of it. This is why you pay all those coaches really good money to make sure your players are good. I think, unless Matt Murray's still around, I don't see that happening, by the way. I'm just saying if that's the only thing I would see the only reason to keep those three goaltenders around, because Woll is not making a lot of money, but Murray's making too much money to be a backup. That's why I think he's gone. So I do think that if Samsonov struggles, it depends on how bad he's struggling. Like if they're not winning and he's costing them games, they're going to go to Joseph Woll. They're not going to put themselves in a situation where they're going to blindly I don't think they're going to just blindly say, Samsonov, we're going to go with you regardless. I do think there's a lot on the line still. I understand Brad Treliving's new to this, so he gets a clean slate, but I don't think there's a situation here where Samsonov's job is in danger either. I do think that they do trust Samsonov, so they'll make it work. I'll say that. All right, those are some really good questions right off the start. I'm going to end the podcast here. We're going to do part 2 of the mailbag tomorrow. I do have more questions, quite a few more questions. If you didn't get your questions in, submit them. I will do them. I'll continue to do this. If I have to do them all week, I will do them all week. This is how much I love you guys. This is how much I want to make sure that, there's a good conversation here with us and the listeners, because you guys are the reason why we do this each and every day. So I do appreciate you guys sticking with me for this long. So I'll do it for here on the podcast today. Thank you for listening and supporting the show, as I just said. And you can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. You can receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at @the_Morassutti, and you can follow the show at Locked On Leafs. I'll be back for another episode tomorrow. We'll continue the mailbag, continue the conversation on the off season. Hopefully, maybe some news will pop in during this time. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.